Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing great. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much, and I am so delighted you've joined me for part 3 of our story, and boy is it exciting. We now know the grandmother Susie happens to be in her grandson's bedroom. The window is open again, so he's obviously been getting out during the night to play with his invisible friend that she still believes is an invisible friend. I know you and I are not so sure about that. And lo and behold, she finds a bracelet lying on the floor. And this bracelet is very, very extraordinary because it belongs to a woman that was bludgeoned to death in an alleyway. So what is it doing among Oliver's toys? We're about to find out more about that. So before we continue with our story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And I would like to mention that it really does make a huge difference to this channel if you could leave a comment, even if it's just to say, hello, how are you? Because, you know, the algorithms pick that up and it really helps promote this channel. So really, any comment makes a huge difference to this channel and I would really appreciate that. Well, let's continue with part 3 of our story. There was no doubt in my mind that I was holding the precious bracelet of a deceased woman in my hand, Mariette Margot Lane, whose pretty face had been splashed all over the papers. The thought made my skin crawl, and a very bitter taste of nausea made its home at the back of my throat. I had listened to enough crime dramas over the years on television to know all too well that murderers would often keep a trinket from the victim that they had slaughtered or killed, as an insidious, macabre memento. This bracelet unequivocally came from the deceased woman's corpse, and why on earth did my son's wife Sasha have this bracelet in her possession, and furthermore was clandestinely hiding it in a secret drawer in her bureau that her son had uncovered? Had my son given it to her by any chance? But if that were indeed the case, where did he get it from? Did someone sell it to him on the street? But my son would never be foolish enough to buy stolen jewellery from someone. He knew better than that. And besides, he was not an unethical person like that, and only a fool ever bought stolen goods. I began to panic, as the person who'd killed Mariette must have indeed been a man. They said she'd been brutally killed with a brick flung against her head. She was found lying deceased in an alleyway, not too far from a parking lot, and her fortuitous death was splayed all over the news, with great attention drawn to the missing bracelet that they believed the murderer had taken off her person. Please God, my son didn't have anything to do with this. My son Nick was not capable of hurting another human being. But then again, why would Sasha be hiding a dead woman's bracelet that would likely be of great interest to the police investigation, that by all accounts had reached a dead end? Before his car accident, my son had been behaving strangely. He seemed eager to meet up with me for coffee at the gingerbread house, to tell me something of great significance. Please God, it had nothing to do with this dead woman and her bracelet. My son Nick had looked worn out and fatigued of late when I saw him last. Something had been weighing heavily on his heart, almost as if he was carrying a burden he wanted to unload. I think there had been a frightened look in his eyes, now that I came to think of it, as if he'd got himself ensnared into a sticky situation, of which there was no escape. My son Nick was not capable of harming anybody. He was one of the kindest people I knew. But then again, his wife Sasha Fontaine, she was as hard as nails. Was she in some way behind the mysterious death of Mariette Margot Lane? And was my son protecting her in some way? The thoughts kept whirling around in my head. I knew on my next visit to the hospital I would need to get to the bottom of this enigmatic mystery. The bracelet could be vital evidence in a crime scene investigation. I think I'm going to hang on to this bracelet for a while, Oliver. Just, to keep it safe, that's all. Suzanne and his mum also like the bracelet, Grammy. They think it's very pretty. I showed it to them. And they tried to put it on, but they couldn't fit it on their wrists, 'cause their wrists are so very big, said Oliver, chuckling. Look, love, you can't play with Sujan at night. Can you not play with him during the day? I don't like you getting out of your window during the night. I would much prefer it if you would do that. But I don't think so, because he likes to sleep during the day, but I could always ask him. Well, then you do that, love. I genuinely believed that Sujan was my grandson's invisible friend. I knew kids on their own often made up invisible friends to play with. You heard about it often enough. But climbing out of the window at night to play games with a made-up friend was ridiculous as far as I was concerned. I unequivocally knew that if Sasha had any idea that her son was slipping out of our window every night, she would not be best pleased with me. I did not want to sour a fragile friendship with her, if you could call it that. It was later during the night I woke up to get some hot cocoa for myself. Sleep did not come easily to me that night, as all I could restlessly think about was my son and the dead woman's mysterious bracelet. I visited Nick regularly at the hospital, and he barely realized I was even there. But he was making steady, ongoing progress, and that was all that mattered as far as I was concerned. But it did not stop me from incessantly worrying as you do. On my way to the kitchen, I discreetly opened Oliver's bedroom door, only to find, to my horror, that the window to his bedroom was wide open again. The curtains were whipping against the pane, as there was quite a brisk wind blowing that evening. My grandson was not in his bed. I noticed Spikes, his beloved dinosaur, was lying abandoned on the floor upside down, almost as if he had lost favour with my grandson, who seemed to prefer the company of his fictitious friend Sujan. I felt extremely annoyed with little Oliver. I couldn't help myself for this reckless disobedience of climbing out of the window at night. What was up with that boy? How could I stop this incongruous behaviour? I had specifically told him that he could not go off at night to play with this invisible friend of his. He was, as a result, defying all my rules. I knew this was all Sasha's fault. My grandson was being decidedly mischievous, because at his home he was subjected to the rigidly strict rules of a draconian mother, who had such a tight hold and grip over his life that the poor boy could barely breathe. Now he was staying with us. He felt more independent, more free to do as he pleased, to express himself without getting into trouble, and he was making the most of this freedom. I felt very disquieted about my grandson's absence from his bedroom, but I knew in my gut he couldn't be very far away. I wondered if my venturesome grandson might possibly be suffering from insomnia, something that his parents weren't even aware of. I was exceedingly worried that he might be impetuously playing around in the yard at night, without being supervised by adults. I hope he had not foolishly, imprudently climbed under the wooden rail fence to go exploring the extensive groves of woods that stretched out over a sizable amount of land. It was all private property that belonged to a wealthy farmer. I was sure he would not rashly do something like that. But then again, how well did I really know my little grandson? I remembered when I was his age, I'd never have ventured out of doors. I wouldn't have dared to do such a thing, let alone climb out of my own bedroom window. I'd have been far too scared to do something as incautious as that. But Oliver was not like a lot of 7-year-old kids his age. He was not intimidated, nor did he scare very easily. He seemed to have an unbridled, adventurous personality that could not be tamed. I do remember Nick telling me that 6 months ago on a shopping trip, Oliver had all but disappeared. Nick was to find him in a toy store, playing with a train set, totally untroubled about the distress he'd actually caused. I decided not to wake my husband up. I mean, what was the point of that? He'd only think I'd not been taking good enough care of Oliver, and in some way it was my fault that the boy had wandered off in the middle of the night to play make-believe with his friend. I retreated back to my bedroom and quickly fumbled around in my cupboard for a pair of sneakers to wear out of doors, hoping to goodness I wouldn't wake up my husband in the process. I then rather gingerly wrapped my dressing gown around my middle, and then I padded rather cautiously down the passageway to the kitchen door, where I made my way discreetly out of the house, using a high-powered torch to guide my way. I was greeted to a brisk breeze punnelling my cheeks. The air was slightly cool, but not enough to get cold. I didn't want to call out Oliver's name, lest I should wake up my husband. When I could not find him in the yard, I realised he must have climbed under the fence to get into the grove, so my worst fears were then confirmed. I was going to be trespassing onto private property, just in order to find him, but it couldn't be helped. I had to do it. I needed to find Oliver quickly. That wretched boy was driving me completely potty. Was there no end to his naughtiness? I crawled under the fence and followed a distinctive trail through the trees. The footpath was unfortunately rather muddy, so my sneakers got filthy. I felt what I can only describe as a huge, monumental sense of relief when I heard Oliver's familiar voice. He was chattering away garrulously to himself, as if he was having the time of his life. I mean, what was that boy like? He was absolutely incorrigible. I felt like I wanted to wring his neck.
Well, why don't we play hide and seek? I love playing hide and seek. It's the best game in the world.
I quietly moved towards Oliver to make certain he didn't see my clandestine approach. I guess I wanted a sneak preview of watching him play his game of make-believe. I was curious. I gasped in absolute astonishment, for my grandson was not alone. So much for this so-called fictitious friend of his. My grandson was playing with a juvenile Bigfoot. For a moment I thought I had to be dreaming. Could this really be happening? But I can assure you it most certainly was. "Oliver!" I called out to him. "Get back here now, will you? You're not supposed to leave your bedroom in the middle of the night. I thought I told you this. You should be in bed fast asleep, like most children your age. You've been very disobedient, and I'm not happy about this."
"Sorry, Grammy, but Suzanne wanted to play with me."
"Oliver, you're supposed to sleep at night. That is what your bed is for." Oliver cocked his head sheepishly.
"Sorry, Grammy, but we're having fun together. We were going to play hide and seek before you came along, but Susan is very good at hiding. Sometimes he can be so still you don't even see him when he's standing right in front of you. I wish I could hide like he does, Grammy."
The little Bigfoot was looking at me through wide, dark, rather frightened eyes. It was clear he was not comfortable with my presence. He was only about 3 foot tall, but with a face so human it took me off guard. I was not frightened of him at all, but more intrigued and rather curious. The little Bigfoot obviously was benevolent. He was like any other regular boy you might meet on the street, only covered in dark hair. His head was pyramid-shaped. His neck was so short you could barely see it, and his arms decidedly long. He looked at Oliver, and I think some type of telepathic exchange was taking place between the two of them, because Oliver said,
"Suzanne wants to go. He's frightened of you, Grammy. I told him you're nice, but he says he can tell you're angry, and he doesn't like angry energy."
I watched the little Bigfoot bolting away, and felt rather bad for the poor thing, because I'd scared him off. I hadn't meant to do that, but meeting him had been such a shock for me. I told my grandson that I wasn't best pleased with his behaviour. "You know you shouldn't play with Suzanne, love. You're my responsibility. You know nothing about him. I think he lives in the woods, but you can't come here in the middle of the night. You could be harmed. There are coyotes and stuff like that around here. It's not safe. And besides anything else, this is private property, and you're trespassing. If that farmer knew what you were doing, he would not be best pleased with you."
"But it's safe here, Mummy. Suzanne's mother watches over us. She's very big. Susan says the coyotes are very scared of her. She scares away the wild animals."
I bent down on my knees to hold my grandson in my arms, and to hold him close. "If you start climbing out of the window during the night, I'll have to tell your mother about it. And you don't want me to have to do that. But if this naughty behaviour carries on, Oliver, you'll give me no choice in the matter." Oliver's eyes grew round.
"My mummy's so strict, Grammy. Please don't tell her. She'll be very, very angry with me. Then she'll never allow me to stay here with you again."
"Well, I won't tell her if you promise me that you won't play with Susan again. I'm sure he's a very nice friend, but I need you to sleep in your bed at night."
"But what if he comes tapping on my window like he did on the first night here? He'll be very upset if I don't want to play with him." Then tell him you need to sleep. Do you understand what I'm saying?
My grandson nodded sorrowfully. I led him back to the house, feeling completely bewildered by the strange idiosyncratic events of that night. I decided I would not share them with my husband, lest he thought I'd lost leave of my senses. I mean, would he ever believe me if I told him what I'd seen, and that our grandson had befriended a juvenile Bigfoot? I seriously doubted it. My mind kept wandering to the bracelet my grandson had acquired, that Sasha had secretly hidden in her bureau. I needed to find out exactly what was going on, but I knew I would only be able to visit the hospital later the following afternoon. I had been informed by the hospital that my son would be having another one of those operations and was being prepped for surgery, so I'd only be able to visit him much later. When I arrived at the hospital in the afternoon, Nick was breathing on his own, thank goodness, but was still connected to a heart monitor. He looked as if he'd been pulverized within an inch of his life, and was worse for wear. Some of his bruises had become distinctly purple in hue, making him look 1,000 times worse than when he was initially brought into hospital. He was woozy from the anaesthesia, and one of his heavily plastered legs was lifted up in stirrups. "I'm only allowing you in because you're family, ma'am," said the nurse, "but your son needs lots and lots of rest, so he can't see too many visitors. He's very, very woozy, but even if he's sleeping you can still talk to him. I'm sure he'll still be able to hear you. But as I say, your visit cannot be long. It's not good for our patient." "Hello, son," I said, standing over Nick's bed. His eyes were closed, but beneath his swollen, cracked lips I heard him say, "Hello, ma'am," and my heart melted at his words. I was heartily relieved to hear him speak again, as on all my other visits he had seemed rather uncommunicative. "Son, look at you, you poor, poor thing. You gave us quite the shock, you did. I've been visiting you now for 3 days, and you've been out for the count. You probably didn't even know I was here. Your father was with me on all those occasions, except now. He's busy at the moment. I barely recognize you, love. You're in such a sorry state, and your bruising is too dreadful for words. What on earth happened to you on that dreadful accident? Do you realize how lucky you are to be alive? The good news is the doctor says you're going to make a full recovery. It's going to be a long, lengthy process, but you're going to get there in the end. And at the end of the day, love, that's all that matters. I will go and see your wife in a moment, although I don't know if Sasha will appreciate my visit. Just so you know, you have nothing to worry about in regards to little Oliver. He sends you lots of love. He's doing remarkably well. Of course, he was dreadfully upset to learn about the accident. But when I told him you were going to be as right as rain, he took it all very well, in his stride, you could say. I'm amazed how resilient that little boy of yours is. He's quite a brave little soldier. He doesn't appear to be afraid of anything. It boggles the mind." I drew in a deep breath, pausing for a moment, and then I boldly said what I came here to say. "There's something I rather need to talk to you about, son. It's a bit sensitive, I'm afraid, but extremely important," I said, fumbling around in my purse to pull out the silver bracelet. "I know your eyes are currently closed, and I would like you to keep it that way because you need to rest. You're very, very tired. Given what you've been through, I'm not surprised. So I'll tell you what I'm holding in my hands. This is a silver bracelet with 3 stones on the front and an engraving on the inside. That little Oliver, your son, said that Sasha hid in a secret drawer in her bureau. The problem is, Nick, this bracelet belongs to a woman called Mariette Margot Lane. I don't know if you've ever heard of the name before, son. I have to tell you that this poor woman was bludgeoned to death by a brick being flung against her body. She was found in a sequestered alleyway in town, close to the parking lot. I do not know what Sasha was doing with this bracelet in her possession, but this is very serious. I'm holding crime scene evidence in my hand, which concerns me greatly. I am given to understand that this charming silver bracelet was missing from Mariette Margot Lane's body when it was recovered. The police emphatically believe that the murderer took the bracelet as some kind of memento, They've asked the public to come forward if they see any sight or sound of this bracelet. What I want to know, Nick, is what on earth is your wife Sasha doing with a dead woman's bracelet in her possession? What is going on, son? Is there something I should know? I'm your mother, you know you can tell me anything. There is nothing in this world that you could ever do or say that could possibly make me love you less, and I hope you realize that, Nick. I know you wanted to meet me before the accident, at the gingerbread house, don't you remember? Was it because you wanted to talk about the deceased woman, and how your wife so happens to be in possession of her silver bracelet? You've got to admit, love, this doesn't look good. I don't know what to make of any of this, and it's worrying me greatly. I don't want to put you under stress, because I know you're recovering, but I needed to address this matter with you. My son's eyes bolted right open. He began to mumble something in earnest, but I could not hear what he was saying. Nick, speak up. I can't hear a word you're saying, love. Can you speak more clearly? Try and speak more clearly. It's very important.
Get rid of it.
All of a sudden, the heart monitor he was attached to went ballistic. The nurse ran over to me, wearing on her face a formidable frown. She shook her head in exasperation, as if I was a fox that had entered a chicken coop and was deliberately causing disarray. Ma'am, what's going on here? Your son's heart rate monitor has shot right up. His heart rate is going through the roof. Perhaps you need to go. We can't afford to stress out the patient. What on earth did you say to him to make him so upset like this? Nothing, I lied. I can't understand what's going on. It's very strange. Well, it is strange, isn't it? Because I haven't seen the heart monitor going ballistic like this before, unless a patient is terribly stressed. You need to go at once, ma'am. Your son needs to heal. He's been in a terrible car accident, I'd like to remind you, and we don't need any setbacks in his healing. I found myself being ferried out of the hospital ward by the nurse, who was not enamoured with me, but my son's words that I'd managed to pick up were already beginning to haunt me.
Get rid of it,
he had growled.
You must get rid of that bracelet.
It would seem that Sasha was in the same hospital, but in a different wing, so I was intent on paying her a visit. She was faring better than Nick, and was doing reasonably well. I guess I suspected my son would have been worse off in the accident, as he was, of course, in the driver's seat. When I told the nurse I wanted to pay Sasha Fontaine a visit, she told me that Sasha had requested to see no visitors, and it was in her best interest to get as much rest as possible to facilitate her healing. She's been badly injured, ma'am. She's recovering very well, I have to say, but still in a lot of pain. She specifically told me she doesn't want any visitors, not even close family or friends. She needs lots of time to rest. She was injured badly in that accident. By all accounts, she's very lucky to be alive. We can't forget that in a hurry. That was some accident that she was involved in. I tried to think quickly on my feet. What could I say to persuade the nurse to let me see Sasha? Well, it's very important, nurse, that I speak with Sasha. It's about her 7-year-old son, Oliver, and I'm afraid it just can't wait. About her son, you say? Asked the nurse, raising a brow. Is it important? Yes, it's very important. It can't wait, as I was saying. It's a small, rather delicate matter that I need to talk to her about. Sasha's very particular, you see, about her routines with her son. I need to speak to her urgently about a little issue concerning Oliver. The nurse's face softened. Well, I suppose if it's about her son, she'll be willing to see you, but I need you to promise me you'll make it very, very quick. It doesn't do to go upsetting the patients when they're trying to recuperate and recover. Well, I won't be long, I assured the nurse. As I entered the hospital ward, Sasha was sleeping against some puffed-up pillows. Her eyes were closed. Sasha, said the nurse, you've got a visitor. Sasha looked up at me, with a deep frown developing on her face, when she recognized who had come to see her. I barely recognized her at all. Her face was distended and puffy, very swollen. In fact, she was so bloated on her left cheek, she rather reminded me of a chipmunk that had stuffed one side of its face with acorns. Her scorched skin was covered in cuts and bruises, and her withered, rather limp arm was held up in a sling. What's she doing here, nurse? I thought I told you I don't want any visitors. Are you dim or something? I want you to get rid of her now. The nurse wilfully ignored Sasha's insolent discourtesy. She said very gingerly, I'm so sorry, Sasha. This lady, I understand, is your mother-in-law, who's looking after your little boy Oliver, I believe. She needs to speak to you about a rather delicate matter concerning your son, and in the circumstances I thought you might want to speak to her, given it concerns your little boy. That's in her charge, I believe. Well, what about him? Asked Sasha, sitting up with a jolt. Is my son all right? Is he all right? Calm down. He's absolutely fine, Sasha, I said circumspectly. Oliver sends you lots and lots of love. He's very upset that you had a dreadful car accident, but I told him you're going to be just fine. You mustn't worry about a thing. We're going to watch over him very carefully for you. Take him to school and that sort of thing. Keep his routines as structured as possible. You didn't go feeding him gluten, did you? I should have guessed you wouldn't listen to me. Nobody believes a word when I say he's gluten intolerant, but he is. What happened? Did you have to go to hospital for a stomach pump or something? Sasha, your son is absolutely fine, I repeated. He hasn't had any allergies, if that's what you're worried about. Nothing of the sort, in fact. And he certainly hasn't needed his stomach pumping. Relief washed over Sasha's face. Well then, what's wrong? Why are you here, Susie? She asked me curtly. Can you not see I need my rest? I was beaten to a pulp in that car accident, I'll have you know. Thrown around like sardines in a can. Can you not respect that? Every part of my body is in absolute agony. You've no idea what it's like to be in such crippling pain, especially when the painkillers wear off. Whatever you have to say, Susie, you better make it quick and then go. Sasha, I'm your mother-in-law. Believe it or not, I care about you a great deal. You're my son's wife and part of my family. How are you doing? How am I doing? She asked me incredulously, staring at me through disbelieving rounded eyes, as if she couldn't grasp the fact that I had the audacity to ask such a stupid question. Look at me, Susie. Look at my body. I'm sure you barely recognize me. How do you think I'm doing? Well, you are beaten up, Sasha. You have looked a lot better. But the good news is you're faring even better than Nick. And that's supposed to make me feel better, is it, Susie? That I came off better than my husband did? You're pathetic, you know that. Sweetheart, well, sorry, Sasha. It didn't come out the right way, and I must apologize for that. What I'm trying to say is that both of you are going to be fine. You were lucky to escape with your lives, and we need to be thankful for that. I'm just so grateful that you both weren't killed in that accident. From what I gather, it was a close call. What exactly happened? You mean the police didn't tell you? Said Sasha scathingly. That is so typical. Why does that not surprise me? Well, let me put you firmly in the picture, shall I, Susie? Some big idiot on the dual carriageway was driving so fast he lost control of his vehicle and went right through us like a rocket out of hell. In the opposite direction, I might tell you. We didn't stand a chance. He was driving at a ludicrously high speed, not looking where he was going. In that moment I was caught off guard, for a tear rolled down Sasha's cheek, and up until that moment I thought the woman was like a stuffed teddy bear, devoid of any emotions. But the Sasha I was seeing now was like a vulnerable little girl, wrapped up in a woman's body. Sasha looked at me through misted eyes. She wiped away a tear. I remember thinking this was it. Those few seconds before that stupid man came plunging right through us. He wasn't drunk or anything, just driving so fast. What's wrong with people, Susie? Why can't they drive at the speed limit? If the man had actually bothered to watch where he was going and slowed down a little, we might not have ended up in this dreadful collision. He told the police that at a high speed his cell phone that he was obviously talking on had slipped out of his hand. He bent down to retrieve it, taking his eye off the road. You should never ever do that. At the same time, he was driving at an insane speed. Everybody was hooting at him. He just zigzagged across the road and went right into us. I still remember the noise, said Sasha, shuddering. The crash of metal, the moment of impact. It seemed to last forever, as if those few seconds were extended into hours. And in that moment, I just knew I was going to die. I felt sad, you know. I thought I didn't want to go like this. I had a little boy, my whole life ahead of me. And now this was it. But what could I do? I guess in that second, I knew it was over for me, and there was not a jot I could do to stop the inevitable. I did not imagine for a moment that I could possibly survive this crash. I remember the loud sound of the collision, and then nothing at all after that. Everything went black, thanks to my concussion. I do remember rather vaguely hearing the sound of firemen extracting us from the vehicle, as they made such a noise. One guy was saying there is no way anybody could possibly be alive in this. I couldn't believe that I was actually breathing, but it was a struggle, let me tell you. I had so many injuries, you see. Let's just say my body was put through a liquidizer. I reached out to squeeze Sasha's hand, and was surprised she didn't retract it. She seemed to appreciate being comforted. It must have been so dreadful. You poor thing. I've heard that people's lives flash before them, moments before an impact and a fatal collision. I can't imagine what it must have been like for you, Sasha. It's not something you'd wish on your worst enemy, is it? Well, that didn't happen to me. I mean, my life flashing before me like you suggest. I guess I just didn't feel ready to die. I mean, I'm still young. I've got little Oliver to raise, who really needs me. And yet I had to let it all go, surrender to what was about to happen to me, even though I didn't want to. And then I drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness. I've had so many operations, but Nick's been through worse than I have. I'm just so glad and grateful he's alive. I never fully appreciated him until now. I realized I married an absolute treasure. You did indeed, Sasha. Let's not kid. Nick is a gem. I'm very happy the both of you are alive. It's perfectly understandable for you to be traumatized by the event. You were clearly not meant to die, so that's why you're still here, isn't it? Is that what you really believe, Susie? Sasha asked me with widening eyes. Do you believe we die when we're meant to? I shrugged my shoulders nonchalantly. How did I answer a question like that, when I didn't even know the answer? Well, do you know what I think, Sasha? That there are no accidents in this world, not rarely. But then again, I don't believe that this is all there is. I believe none of us rarely die. I'm a distinct believer in reincarnation. It's the only thing that makes perfect sense to me. You might not agree with me on the matter. But otherwise, how do you explain the unfairness in this world? A kid, for example, dying at a mere 5 years old, while an old man dies at 101. Then there's the person living in abject poverty, and another living in the trappings of great abundance. I mean, if we reincarnate numerous times, we can experience a whole range of diversities. One life we may be poor like a church mouse, the next as rich as a king. It's even in the Bible, you know, reincarnation, although it's never mentioned in sermons. I think that the next life is more real than this one. Of that I'm most sure. That's what I've heard all the time, you know, in these near-death experiences that people talk about. Whether we're meant to die in a certain date is anybody's guess. Well, on a certain date. Some people believe these things are preordained, don't they? And maybe they are. But I'm no expert on any of these matters, and I don't pretend to be otherwise. I'm only telling you what I believe, which could be way off. Now, there is something I need to talk to you about, Sasha, I said, pulling the bracelet out of my purse to show her. Sasha's face tightened. There was fear written in her eyes as she focused on the silver bracelet in my hands. She gasped, "Oh, my God! Where did you get that from?" "Where did I get this from, Sasha? Where do you think I got it from? If you must know, little Oliver brought it into the house. It was in his toy collection, in the box that my husband brought into the house from the trunk of the black BMW, when you happened to drop Oliver off to stay at our house for a week. That silver bracelet fell out of his toy box. It was lying on the floor, and I happened to notice it at once. I asked Oliver why he'd taken your precious jewellery. I mean, he's a little boy who shouldn't be interested in girls' things. But he happened to be intrigued by the way the bracelet sparkled. It was like one of his favourite marbles, he told me. So he kept it and forgot to put it back where he found it. He told me you had clandestinely hidden the bracelet in a secret drawer in your bureau that he wasn't supposed to know about.
Honestly, that boy, said Sasha, rolling her eyes.
Well, what worries me, Sasha, is that this precious silver bracelet belongs to a murdered woman by the name of Mariette Margot Lane. Her death has been widely reported all over the local media. Her husband said an expensive silver bracelet she never removed from her wrist was missing from her corpse. He had given it to her for their wedding, with her full married name engraved on the back, and the words, "I love you forever." Well, it was all missing from her body. What I want to know, Sasha, is why do you, of all people, have a deceased woman's missing bracelet in your possession that you deliberately hid away in your bureau? What on earth is going on? Does my son know about this? Did you find the bracelet somewhere? Did my son give it to you? I need to know, Sasha, all the details. It's terribly important. Do you realize I am holding in my hands something the police would consider crime scene evidence and would be very interested in seeing?
Stop all the questions, will you, Susie? Said Sasha, waving me away, as if squatting a fly. Why do you have to be so nosy about everything? Poke your nose into everybody else's business. If you must know, Nick told me to get rid of the bracelet, but I didn't want to. He said it fell off Mariette's hand when he hit her with the brick in that alleyway, said Sasha. I couldn't throw the bracelet away. How could I do that? Mariette adored that bracelet. It was so special to her. You knew the dead woman? You never said. Of course I knew Mariette. She was my very best friend. But I didn't go advertising that when the news about her death was reported on every local radio station. But I was interviewed by the police because we were very close. We grew up in the same neighbourhood together. We were pretty much inseparable and were still close before she died. I miss her dreadfully. Do me a favour, Susie. You need to get rid of that bracelet. I'm begging you, get rid of it. If the police find it, we'll get into so much trouble. You've got to get rid of it. Believe me, you have to. I don't know why I kept it. I must have lost leave of my senses. I cannot believe Oliver got hold of it. He's like a magpie. He's drawn to anything that sparkles. I tucked the bracelet cautiously back into my purse. Sasha, what is going on here? You haven't answered my questions. You've got to admit this does not look good for you. And as for myself, I should be responsible enough to be handing this over to the police. It's a criminal offence to tamper with evidence. I'm sure you know that. But you can't do that, said Sasha, looking horrified. Please, Susie, the less you know about this, the better. Pretend you never ever saw the silver bracelet, and let's move on from here, shall we? But get rid of the thing, I'm begging you. I don't know if I can, Sasha. There's a dead woman involved here. There's a family grieving her loss. Justice needs to be served here. I can't turn a blind eye to this. Quit goading me, Susie. All right, I will tell you everything. But it's strictly between you and I. And for God's sake, don't you dare go blabbing to the police. That is the worst possible thing you could do. If it makes you feel any better, Nick told me she didn't suffer. Her death was quick. He didn't mean for it to happen. It was a dreadful, dreadful accident. My body froze at the mention of Nick's name. Had my Nick killed Mariette Margot Lane? It couldn't be. The blood drained out of my body as I gawked at Sasha, my jaw dropping to the ground. I felt as if I'd been run over by a freight train. I must have misheard her, surely. There is no way my Nick would raise a hand to a woman, let alone kill her. I couldn't believe he'd killed her, Susie. I really couldn't. I wanted to kill him myself for what he'd done. He was such a prize idiot. I had no idea he'd even got involved with my best friend at the party like that.
It threw me to the curb, let me tell you. I was absolutely furious to find all this out, and it was very hard for me to forgive him for what he'd done. But I've got a big heart, Susie. He was dreadfully afraid, poor Nick, of being put in prison and his reputation going up in smithereens. I'd warned him that Mariette was working up the courage to go to the police, because finally she confessed to me. She told me everything that had happened that night. She said that Nick had sexually assaulted her at that party. When Nick heard that, I tell you, he freaked out. I knew Mariette wasn't making any idle threats. She decided she was definitely going to the police, that it was the right thing to do, even though I persuaded her not to, but she refused to listen. Nick told me that at the party, she was the one that had come on to him, and not the other way round. She'd said no to him, but she insists she never said no. She claimed he forced himself on her. How am I supposed to take that, Susie? I love Nick. He's been so good to me, you know. How can I betray him? By telling the police what he's done. I mean, he never ever meant to hurt Mariette. All he wanted to do was to talk to her, make her see reason. They really should have met in a public place, but they didn't. When he saw her venturing down the alleyway in town, he thought this was a quintessential opportunity to talk to her in private, without any prying eyes around. She'd been refusing to take his calls or to see him. Well, things escalated down that alleyway. They got out of hand. Mariette provoked him with all her threats. She told him that they hoped they flung him into jail and threw away the key, and that everybody would know the truth about him, that he was nothing but a perverse sexual predator. When I saw the bracelet in his possession on the desk in the hallway, my blood went cold, let me tell you. I knew that Mariette would never ever take that bracelet off that her husband had given her, but Nick confessed that it actually fell off her hand. So he picked it up and put it in his pocket and ran away with it. He was worried that when he grabbed her wrist, that the fingerprint might be on the bracelet. He admitted to me he had killed her in a moment of unbridled anger when he picked up a brick he found lying in the alleyway and just slammed it at her head. Mariette was doggedly stubborn, you see, Susie. I know all too well what she's like. She told me that Nick was not going to get away with raping her at the party. But I don't believe for a second he actually raped her. Nick would never ever do that. I think she came on to him. Her husband knew nothing about this incident. But she's done this thing before, Susie, so I don't trust her completely. She's blamed other men for raping her in the past, and they never touched her. So she does that kind of thing, you know. I told Mariette that it was just probably a misunderstanding, that Nick would never ever force himself on anyone. She said he knew exactly what he was doing. Nick had been inebriated that night. He admitted that to me. He didn't mean for things to go so far. I was shocked he killed her, but I believe him when he said that her fortuitous death was never premeditated. It just happened. You see, he followed her into town because he was so frustrated, because he needed to talk to her. And then he saw her taking a shortcut through that alleyway to get to the parking lot. He saw this as the perfect moment to just have a private chat with her. But she started screaming at him. And then, partly to shut her up, I suspect, he just picked up a brick and threw it at her head. The blood drained from my face. Nick did this? Oh, Sasha, it's just too dreadful. You're telling me Nick did this? I can't believe it. So there we are. That is part 3 of our story. Part 4 is tomorrow night. And my word, isn't it getting heated? Imagine being a mother and discovering that you believe your son has now accidentally killed somebody. Killed them in an act of absolute anger. Well, we'll find out more about the story tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.